Carmen, you're in Texas, you said.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
Julia, where are you?
I'm in Fairfax, Virginia. It's snowy out.
Oh,
Is new snow or just remaining snow?
No remaining snow, but it's still beautiful.
What
And
did you guys get? About
about
6 to 8 inches? Five
5 inches. Yeah.
inches.
Yeah,
Nice.
where we are. Yeah. And, I loved it. I was dancing around outside in it. It's been a long time since I've had snow where I lived. I grew up in the Chicago area, moved out to California, and now I'm here. And it's pretty nice. So that's not what everyone else is saying. That's not what I'm hearing on the street.
Yeah. The snow totals in the DC area can vary incredibly because just not even 50 miles west of the DC area are the Shenandoah Mountains.
Yeah.
And then not even 50 miles east of the DC area is the Chesapeake Bay. So you get this, depending upon where the storm tracks, the mountains can get a lot of snow or the bay can get a lot of snow, kind of like a lake effect snow. So I've lived there 40 years now. Yeah, 40 years plus. And it's quite fun to kind of try to figure out what any particular part is actually going to get.
Little microclimates all around. Yeah. Yeah. So wait, where are you, Henrietta? I mean, so Carmen, you're near San Antonio,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. Although you're trying to convince us of that with your blurry background, we don't really know.
I can unblur it here. I'm gonna unblur it because why not?
See, there we are. And we have the loose lipped sink ships poster
I think
behind
it's
you.
careless talk.
Costs lives, same concept.
Yeah, yes.
And
yeah.
Henrietta, where are you? Someplace where there's a sort of a beigey utilitarian background.
This is my white wall in my dining room. I'm in Bristol, which is in the southwest of the United Kingdom, quite close to Wales, if that means anything to you. And the actual house, I live in a flat, first floor of an 1870 house that was built by tea merchant. Bristol's quite closely associated. So it was a busy port, and so as in any UK city, there are associations with the slave trade. Unfortunately, and the architecture kind of tells that story. I think, yeah.
So the tea merchant would have been involved in the slave trade.
Well, 1870 it was illegal, but you can't help thinking that the legacies of the slave trade can't have hurt the sort of financial patterns that were built up through that. Yeah, yeah.
Got it.
Just
And Bristol is also where, is it Banksy's hometown or just where he got started? He or she, I think it's a he, yeah.
yeah, I don't know Banksy, but certainly Bristol, and I don't know where he grew up. I don't know anything about him, but I think he is a him. Certainly Bristol is where he's associated with. There are Banksys in the street art, and it's brilliant to go around. It was lovely meeting your friend Carmen and doing a bit of a Banksy tour and realizing the extent of my ignorance. I'd take it. Well, I'd take it to another thing, and I'd start confidently saying, "Yeah, I think this is," and then think, "Yeah, I don't really know that." So,
Wait,
yeah.
why does everyone think Banksy's a he?
Um, I just think that that's how people who seem to know him have referred to him. So, for
That's how people,
example,
yeah.
But that could be part of the occlusion, right?
Yeah. I was at a market in somewhere near where my friend Gloria Craig lives, down in Somerset, and they had some that guy, the dealer, claimed to know Banksy, and he had these pieces, and he said that he comes down every once in a while and lets me provides me some, lets me buy some or whatever. I don't know if it's true, but so I bought my friend Mary Gratch one of them because there was at least a little bit of provenance there that I could explain to her.
That's really cool.
Fantastic. I mean, you're right. We don't know, right? And that's part of the the mystique.
I mean, if
But that
I were
gives,
Banksy and a woman, I would dress as a man, and people would assume I was a man, but and that would be an extra way to hide, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
are you Banksy?
I'm just saying, if I were, that seems like what I would do, right?
So Henrietta, what would you like to talk about? So I was just refreshing myself by looking at your LinkedIn profile a few minutes ago, and I noticed that you had a conference or something about gender and disarmament, or am I remembering it right?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm just really happy to join your conversation. Is the first thing, everything you've talked about is really fascinating. What you're thinking about is at the start of the of 2024, I was part of a team that launched a special issue of an academic journal called Sevco. It's a German journal, and the focus of the special issue was on feminist gender approaches to disarmament and arms control. It was really fascinating and such an honor to get together an amazing set of authors. And really, the special thing about this special issue was the working pattern that we developed to do it. So the instigators of the whole thing were a couple of master's students. One was at SOAS, one was at King's College London. SOAS is the School of Oriental and African Studies in London.
Yes,
so
that's right.
two London universities who had volunteered for a project called SCRAP, which is all to do with disarmament and arms control. And they had first put together a series of webinars to try and give voice to underrepresented women at the forefront of disarmament and arms control.
Very
they worked
cool.
really hard. Yeah, they were fantastic. Nancy Ehrenberg Peters and Yanis Kappelman, I should give them names, and they had a team of colleagues that were doing this. And then Yanis identified this opportunity for a special issue and said, should we put in? And I was like, sure. So I supported them, but they basically were the intellectual drivers for the whole thing. And then we got the special issue and we located the authors. That in the proposal, we had kind of got provisional yeses from a bunch of people. And then you have to turn those provisional yeses into actual papers. And they were all wonderful, some wonderful, fascinating papers. The one thing that was really difficult that might interest you is, as hard as we tried to involve thought leadership from the global south, it was very, very hard. So we had a lot more agreement at the start, in the starting stages, and one by one, people unfortunately had to leave for time, money, pressures, which maybe is no surprise in this political world. I think that the surprise is, we would have loved to do more for them. We tried our hardest to kind of support them and to save them time and to help them as much as possible. But it wasn't enough for all of them. Some, not everybody dropped out, but nevertheless, we've got great papers. I'd be interested in your take on some of the themes that came out. Were simply increasing the numbers of women might actually reinforce the status quo. There's no easy correlation between women and peace. I think a lot of disarmament advocates kind of feel that maybe women have a magic solution to challenging patriarchies, but actually by becoming involved in the world, you're socialized into structures and ideas and thoughts, and then you perpetuate them. I don't know if that correlates with any of your experiences.
Well, that's interesting because I keep thinking just going with women, I would not expect any difference, but looking at the generation, you might expect a difference. Like the boomer, sorry, I hope I'm not being offensive. Here we go. Like,
I'm the only one.
I know, I don't want to offend you, but the boomer women I know, except for a few notable exceptions like Carmen and others, have been trained in this idea as a woman that you're competitive with other women. There's no like bringing up and holding up, etc. The younger generations have been taught more explicitly, like if a woman says something in a meeting, someone else doesn't hear it, and then some man takes credit, you say, oh, that was a great idea that, Henrietta originally thought of. And so there's much more understanding about how to actually support each other and amplify. And so I guess I'm wondering if that observation depends on the age of or the generation of the woman on average.
Well, the papers were presenting empirical research on the behaviours of women in international negotiations or in different contexts or in sort of the industry. So I'm not sure that I can really comment on that in terms of the research that was presented, because I'm not sure any of them dealt with that specific aspect. But that makes complete sense to me, and that would be a great follow-up study to think about how different generations do it. I don't know. I just don't know. The young people I know are absolutely fantastic in their thinking and their energy and their recognition that there are problems. And there's also a concern that people are maybe a bit not, I mean, I don't want to say this without sounding judgmental.
Totally
like I've given up. Well, like I'm kind of cynical and like, yeah, that won't work. So I don't want to be that person. But in some interactions that I've had, there's perhaps a bit of naivety about quite how hard it is to be a woman in some of these places. So young scientists that I've talked to have been like, yeah, gender not an issue for me. It's all about the science. And then they hit 30 and they're like, oh, right, I haven't been promoted as much as him. And now if I want a baby, odds are my publication rate will go down. There's empirical evidence that, the more children a woman scientist has, the publication rate goes down, the lower the chances of progression. The more children a man has, the higher the publication rate, the higher the chances of progression. And so I hope they unionize. I hope they build their support structures so that they can carrying on through their lives. I don't know. Does that resonate with your experiences?
Well, certainly in academia, absolutely, and also talking with younger students I mentor, and even outside of academia in the world of technology, younger women that I mentor, or even not women, but gender fluid or non-binary women, anyone who's not a white man. Or
So
so it's like anyone who's not like a white straight man has to learn how to navigate that. And you can come into it saying I'm colorblind or I'm gender blind, but the experiences don't hold up to that, as you say. Like there's this empirical evidence that the experiences don't hold up to that. So then what do you do? And the tricky thing is that the younger people who have that energy, who I've come across, they need that. Like it's a disaster if you tell them, well, actually, I mean, so it's sort of like you need them to think that it's going to be okay so that they can make the change. Because otherwise it's depressing and horrible and you're just like, I'll never do anything. And so it's sort of like, how much information do you tell someone? And maybe you're wrong. I mean, so it's really hard to sort out. Like you don't want to cut them off at the quick because maybe they've got a new solution that's going to work, right? And certainly I think people think about me like that with my naivete about government and stuff, right? Like you don't want to cut me off at the quick. I'm very naive, but like that energy could actually help change something or help people see things in a different way. So I relate to that.
Well,
Anyway.
I would just say from my personal experience observing you, Julia, there were any number of things that you did that I didn't think would work and have worked to some extent or another. I mean, have worked more than I would have ever thought they could work. So I think that it's foolish for us to believe that we know how things will always be.
Right.
And until you introduce people into the dynamic who have a view of how they could be different, you haven't tested the environment. So we've done that again. We've been talking without introducing our guest again.
I don't know. Yeah, so I want to carry on with that.
Yes, but I just want to say your name is Henrietta Wilson. And you're a researcher in many issues. You wrote a book about open source recently, but your main area seems to be nuclear kind of stuff. Is that fair?
Well, I kind of span weapons of mass destruction, disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. I started as a physicist, so and I'm a portfolio worker, so I mix freelance, employed, teaching, research, writing, all sorts of stuff. But yes, that's
Yes,
great.
very
And my
good.
book isn't out yet, but it will be soon, just in
Oh,
case
okay.
you're
All
interested.
right.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that's really interesting because one thing that I think is quite nice, it's a sort of double-edged sword, isn't it? Because I think one thing that's great about being a non-standard white man is that you maybe have a luxury to make atypical choices, and so that's a great chance if
It's
you can.
expected of you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. I don't
But
know
it
if
doesn't
I
mean
don't
it's
know.
not, it doesn't mean it's
Yeah,
not punished. It's
yeah.
Of
expected of
course,
you.
yeah, it's expected of you, and then,
You could be punished.
and then punished. Exactly.
Yeah, but the motto maybe is maybe not naivety, but to stay curious, to stay open to those different ways of doing things, and not to measure yourself against some sort of artificial pre-designed hierarchy.
Right.
That's right. So one thing
So,
I think that, sorry,
sorry, I
Julie,
think there
do you
was a
want
bit
to
of a
say?
lag. I didn't mean to interrupt. Well, I
Oh,
was wondering how that worked in your career, Carmen.
well, people ask me that, and so it's hard for me to be very clear, definitive about this because I was always inside of myself, and and I wasn't observing how that came across, and I when I started my career at CIA, I was one of the few new people that was hired in the late 70s, early 80s. That was a time when there wasn't a lot of hiring into CIA. So the age uh, dynamic, I think, played as much of a part as my ethnicity and gender, although my ethnicity was totally weird for that organization at the time. I mean, I was like, no, there was really nobody else like me among the analysts. Um, and I, I certainly found myself holding minority, by which I mean
Unpopular. Yeah.
non-consensus positions on many issues. And the one in particular that I've talked a lot about was the demise of apartheid in South Africa, which I thought in the mid to late 80s was imminent. And everyone scoffed at me about that. And mostly they scoffed at me about that view because they felt that I did not understand how power worked in society. Why? Well, I mean,
I'm
I
just
think
laughing because who but the people who have their power over them to understand how power works.
and so I, but I believe that there were other ways that the non-whites could project power or be powerful in that society. And then the other uh, point that I think is relevant here is they say, well, the blacks, I hate to use these words, but that's how they were talked about. The blacks aren't organized, which is, I think, code for a whole other kind of stuff that they're saying about blacks and non-whites in general. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, their idea of what organization is very limited to kind of this way that they think about organization, hierarchy, clear lines of authority. And just because you don't have that doesn't mean that you can't act together on some issue. But I found it extremely difficult to make those points at the time. I mean, I wasn't unpersuasive, but I wasn't persuasive either. And it wasn't until after the 80s, in the mid 90s, that I learned about complexity theory. And if I had known about complexity theory in the 80s, I would have had better foundations on which to argue what I thought was happening in South Africa. In other words, in South Africa in the 80s, we were getting emergence and
Right.
self-organization, and we were reaching a tipping point. And none of those phrases really were in anyone's vocabulary until complexity theory emerged. So it's a
Right.
long-winded tale there.
Can I ask you a question about that experience?
Me, okay, sure.
You. Um,
It's like you're watching a tennis match now. Henrietta on the
Yeah,
screen.
and
I
I
Well,
can
hope
I
see
that
her.
Julia
I can see her eyes
also
go
answers
here and then go there.
yeah. It's great, and I hope that Julia also answers the question about how these things, how the dynamics have played out in her career. But
In her career,
yes,
Well, I
yes.
want to know
Okay.
how
it's
and
first
how
of
it's
all,
played out in your career. So, well, I'll answer that question. But first,
yeah,
Carmen, in the story, I'm struck by the way you explained it this time. I'm struck by if I'm imagining myself as one of those people who's not getting it, and what is going on for them. And it occurs to me that what's going on for them, and I'm checking with you to see if this is your sense too, is what's going on for them in that moment something like, I'm trying to ignore the fact that these people don't look like me physically, but their structures need to look like our structures so that we can at least put ourselves in their shoes and see that they're ready. Is that right?
I think that's right. I think that they expected the blacks to organize themselves in the ways that, the Dutch
Right.
organized themselves, and the Dutch are famously organized,
Right. Right.
people. And they just couldn't imagine that there was another way to act together than through a hierarchical organization.
Right. So they
so
were
a
like,
very sorry.
no,
Well, a very specific idea of being
Yeah,
organised, and it might
yes.
involve having a degree, having a chairperson,
Oh,
having members
yes.
of committee, taking minutes. Yeah,
Robert's
yeah.
Rules of Order.
Which, in a in a dangerous setting, that's a dangerous thing to do.
Exactly. Exactly. Why would you organize in ways that could be easily attacked? Exactly.
Yeah. That's not an intelligent system. That's not emergence. Yeah. So how would you answer that question, Henrietta? The question you asked of Carmen.
Do you know what? I've forgotten what the question is, but it was sort of how had the dynamics of hierarchy versus non-hierarchy impacted on me? Well, I guess I've always having a portfolio career, I've made non-standard decisions about my career all the way through, in a sense of I'm not quite sure at any one time maybe what I do want to do, but I know what I don't want to do, and I say yes to things that are interesting. I'm not necessarily motivated by external validation in the way that I'm aware some of my friends and contemporaries are, and I don't know if that's to do with gender or to do with me or my family background, or there's a whole bunch of, we're all a whole composite of people, aren't we? And I'm very satisfied with how things have turned out. I like the variety. I'm interested by it. I've done really fascinating things, and that's good. Yeah. How about you, Julia?
Yeah, you turned it around so that you could frame your own system. Yeah. What did I do? I'm sure I did something just like that. I mean, I think you could tell a story about me doing something just like that, like being frustrated with academia because of the slowness and the unwillingness to look at certain questions, and then going outside of academia to try to do that, but then going back into. So I always like to go back in. So now going back into academia, same with the tech world, getting involved in the tech world, then being like, ugh, then going back into it and saying, here's a possibility. So I tend to want to use the striation of these systems to create new structures, and then come back to the original sort of more stick in the mud systems and say like, hey, this is really working, not just for me, but like this might actually work for you. This might actually work better for you, even if you didn't have to build it because of the situation that you're in. And so I guess I like to weave sort of other possibilities into the mainstream.
Right. So you're innovating and then challenging, moving things forward in different ways.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm
Cool.
motivated like that. Yeah, apparently.
So
How
Henrietta,
exciting. Yeah.
I asked you this before, and I was glancing at this so I could ask you more precisely. So there's the American think tank, the Center for the Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, and they have a project on nuclear issues. Are you familiar with that?
What we call PONY, the Project on Nuclear
Pony,
Issues.
yeah,
Yes. And there's
Pony.
UK PONY as well.
Oh,
Yes.
and so the
Yes.
director of the American institute or Pony right now is Heather Williams,
Yes.
who I noticed in her bio has some relationship with England. So
Yes.
I just was asking if you knew
Yeah.
her or
Yeah, she's a wonderful woman. Yes, and so she was also. So I'm doing a PhD in King's College London. My supervisor is Philippa Lempsos. Philippa used to share an office with Heather Williams, and I'm now sharing an office with Philippa Lempsos. So I've kind of
nice.
taken Heather's office space.
Ah,
But also I've met Heather a couple of times when she lived in the UK, and really impressive person.
and
Yeah.
the reason why I mention this is because the person who started Pony at CSIS
Okay.
is a very dear friend of mine, Clark Murdoch. And you could find no more white male anywhere than Clark. And in fact, Clark wraps around to my South Africa story because he was working on Africa. He was my boss at the time that I was talking about. And while he was one of the ones who believed that the whites were too powerful, in the end, he concluded that my view was right after some consideration. When he left government, he went to CSIS, and he's very proud of how he mentored women. And
That's awesome.
Understandably so. For I have heard people as prominent as Michelle Flournoy, who was has often been named as a potential Secretary of Defense under Democratic administrations, and Kath Hicks, who is Deputy Secretary of Defense currently, at, for example, Clark's retirement party, talk about Clark and how what a great mentor he was to their careers. So there's something about that story and the bookending of it all, which I find very satisfying, and I think speaks to the potential impact. I don't want to say anything grand about myself, but the potential impact that all of us can have through our lives when we just speak our truths,
Yeah.
whatever those truths are. And I know that Clark respected and always heard my truths, even though we often disagreed.
Yeah.
And disagreement has got to be part of it, right? We have to be able to disagree in civil ways, and that's how we get better truths.
Well, not just able, but I think we need to be motivated to disagree, right? Because like, what's the point of having more than one decision maker or analyst if everyone disagrees? You just have one. I mean,
that's an obvious point, Julia. If there's only one correct decision, why do we need so many bureaucrats?
Exactly. I have a physics question and a nuclear related one for you, if we can go there.
Great, let's do it.
All right. So I'm working, it all ties in. I'm working with I'm just casually having conversations with one of the super forecasters that IARPA originally, she got to meet like Phil Tetlock and, Daniel Kahneman and folks.
Are you familiar with IARPA, Henrietta? And maybe we should say
no, but I know Daniel Kahneman. I mean, well,
yes, but IARPA is like the research arm of the intelligence community, and I think it stands for Intelligence Advanced
Research Projects Agency,
something like that.
It used to be like activity, and then it became agency. Yeah.
Like
So
DARPA, but
Yeah,
intelligence.
it's like,
Yes,
exactly, it's
yes.
DARPA,
Yeah.
but for the intelligence community, right?
Right. And so they wanted to see, some people are just really good at analysis and prediction. Can we screen for these people and can we develop them? And they developed a group of so-called super forecasters who were good at this. There were 4,500. This person, I'm not going to say her name. I don't have her permission, and I want to keep it quiet. But I'll
Good.
just say she's in the top 10 of the 4,500. And
Ooh.
she's really good. And um, we had a really good conversation. And then I said, well, is it okay if I test you on precognition, which is something I'm very interested in? So the
And I
ability to,
saw the podcast about Carmen's ground beef in the refrigerator. And
yes,
yes, yes.
yes, the ground beef story. Where's the beef?
Yeah.
So anyway,
Sorry, yes.
no, I was starting to test her. And so the idea is in the future, a random number generator will choose a task, but she has to answer the question before anyone on the planet knows what the question is. Like, it's a hard task, right? With a super forecaster, you're given a question. Like, do you
Yeah.
think that the Japanese currency will go to a certain level by a certain date, right? In this case, the question's in the future, so it's a lot more work in a certain sense. Anyway, so she sends me her answer. Her answer is 100% off. But her answer is, and she sent this to me Thursday night, so January 18th. The answer is that North Korea will have some kind of a nuclear submarine that they're testing. And then on January 19th, the news comes out that North
Right.
Korea claims that they have a nuclear submarine that she's testing, that they're testing.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, she's really good at precognition, not at the right question, but at the thing that needs to be known, which is very common among people who are really good at this.
Interesting.
And so my question to you is, one, I mean, it involves a nuclear submarine. So first of all, that's interesting. Uh, and I haven't told the other part of the story, which is there's a guy who does research in this field who did an experiment suggesting that because targets that were nuclear kept psychics were better at predicting them than targets that were not nuclear. He thinks there's an entropy related, like things that have higher entropy or potential for a big change in entropy actually could help in time sort of become a landmark for an event. Anyway, what do you think of that?
Well, gosh, I mean, I feel this is way outside of anything that I know very much about. um, so I'm very interested in your use of the word entropy. So there's the equation of entropy with disorder and or information. So could you say any more about this linkage between targets, subs, entropy? I didn't really follow that.
Oh, so yeah, so the guy who had done this previous work, Edwin May, he was a physicist and he started and he just has done a bunch of experiments with skilled practitioners of this ability to somehow predict these things or accurately get information in this way. And he kept noticing that targets that were related to nuclear things, whether it was a nuclear silo, a nuclear sub or whatever, or fires, or things that to him just struck him as like potential for massive changes in entropy, or even someone at the top of a mountain, like a picture of someone at the top of the mountain with a yo-yo or something like that. Like these are kind of promises
these
of
kind of panda events. Are these like is it unusual events that people are more able to
so he does his
imagine, anticipate? I'm kind of wondering if there's a sort of like a bit of research to be done with these amazing forecasters about if you're thinking about things that are really unusual, then there's actually fewer possibilities than very commonplace, like I don't know, the
this
use
is
of drones in
yes.
yes, yeah.
Yes. No, this is a statistical argument that I've heard, which is that, well, but when is North Korea going to say they're going to test a nuclear submarine? That would be very unusual. So that's why she got it. But then you also have to think of it statistically. The chances of her getting it the night before that they do that. Right. So like that it doesn't make it actually easier when it's a one-off event or some kind of event like that. It actually makes it harder for the timing, right? Because sure, at some point they're going to say that. So the question is, how do you get the timing? And that's So anyway, his
It is
proposal.
amazing. It's amazing to me that the whole story was amazing to me, I have to say. But I don't, I'm kind of wondering if there's an explanation to help. What shortcuts are those super forecasters doing to, condense all the data, condense all the possibilities to, I'm going to give you one fact.
Yeah.
Hey hody, it's right. Is it
Hey,
luck?
howdy.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that was the question of the super forecasting challenge, was to try to figure out, there's some people who are really good at this. What are they doing? Are they really good unconscious analyzers? Are they psychic? Are they getting information from the future? So so the answer is we don't know, right? And so we don't have to solve that problem right now. But my question is, do you think that there is, like, can we tell a story physically using physics about even the potential for a big change in entropy? Like, it's not like they did explode a missile, they claim, right? So maybe that's that. But even the picture, that's the original guy who did this studies, it was actually pictures of like nuclear silos, and they would be better at those, at getting those, right? So it's not even like an event in the world where there was an actual,
Pictures of sort of what the capabilities are and
yeah,
who's got what when.
or
Well, I guess,
a picture
yeah,
of of some power plant would be easier for people
components.
to detect than like a picture of a lake.
Well, so I mean, I guess this takes me into my work on open source investigations and the amount of visual imagery we're all surrounded by, and the way it feels very much to me as though the way we all know and interact with the world has really radically changed with digital technology and our access to data. We can get traditional data more easily, more quickly, if we happen to have a stable internet and the right tech. But click of a button, I can get New York Times, Washington Post in a way it's just trivial now. And it didn't used to be that hard. I just had to buy a subscription, right? And it would come to my door, but it would be late and it would be a bit cumbersome. And
Yeah.
now click, 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 there I am. And as part of that, I think there's a lot of visuals in it. I think this might be, is this kind of where what you're getting at, Julia, that, it's not just words, there's a lot of pictures. Social media is video, image generated, and driven. That's what gets the clicks, that's what gets the upticks. And we also have Google Earth. We can go and street view, we can kind of see, we can imagine ourselves in a different place. And I think it changes how we see our own place in the world quite a lot. It also changes how we think we know. There's a temptation to think it's easy to know somewhere else. I can go and hover, I can go and look in different places via different free satellite providers. But I would argue it's a sort of false intimacy. It's not, we don't really know. I think it takes a lot of work to translate the visuals and the data into something meaningful, let alone likely to be accurate. Carmen, I've heard you say a picture's worth 1,000 lies, and I've
Yes.
carried that around. And that's even, I think that's even before we get into deep fakes. There's a way of spinning our understanding of the world that's very, very easily distorted by the sorts of visuals we're surrounded by. Does that make sense to you? Do you
I mean, I think
relate to
that's
that at all?
where it takes me in relation to that conversation about the super forecasters deal, which I'm still like blown away by, is that the way we absorb information now visually and with this context of this larger world and the open source universe is changing our brains, so that the way we think about knowledge, what we can know and what we should be able to predict and what we should know, is sort of anyone's guess right now, because we haven't mapped like what this does to the human brain. We haven't mapped how this does change knowledge and what we believe to be true and what we think accuracy is. So that's what I got from that, which I think is a really good point. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll
no,
say yeah.
many years ago, it struck me that we, the baby boomers, are the first generation to, and I've said this before, to be completely connected with the past in the sense that there are images, movies, images with sound about all of these past events. And
Mhm.
they are 100+ years old now. And I just think that I always thought 30 years ago that that was going to have a significant effect on us as a species, on,
Not
the
just
fact
us.
that we can see our past so clearly is eventually going to have and is already having a big impact. And
And do
I,
you think, yeah, sorry,
that's
do you
it.
think it kind of condenses our understanding of history? So those 100-ish years of this really rich visual world, and
Yes.
then you've got before that, and do you
Yeah.
think that people think it didn't really exist before that, or
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, I
yeah,
think,
okay,
yeah.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
the connection, I think the Civil War in the American context, the Civil War, our Civil War is where we begin to get that record only in photographs. And then, but that's sort of the beginning of uh a, a real history for a lot of people is the Civil War.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
For
I, I
and in the American context,
I
right?
don't think it's just changing our brains or our minds the way we lay out time, because I do see that as a shelf in time, right? Before sort of pictorial documentation versus after, because you could say anything about anything, right? And now, of course, there's going to be another shift in time because you can make whatever picture or film you want,
Yes.
right? And so now we just got to the point where we could start understanding what that does to the human mind, and now we're going to mess it up again because we're going to have a whole different story. But I also think it's changing time itself. Like, I feel like information and time are somehow interwoven. So by locking down the past, it constrains sort of the information space. Like, if you think of like a conservation of information idea, like if you imagine, I guess I'm partial to these sort of interpretations of quantum mechanics that are like information theory interpretations of everything. And so if you imagine there's like an informational substrate for everything at a fundamental level, if you're locking down, if you're sort of collapsing the way of function in the past, because it's like we know that information now, like there's some kind of human knowledge that changes the information substrate, then that's going to change what we could know in the future, right? If there's some kind of conservation of information that can be known. I don't know. That's probably too far afield.
well, I don't know, I mean, I guess this has triggered a whole bunch of kind of whatabouts in my head, and I don't know, I'm not a historian, I don't know, but I did have it when Carmen was saying history started in the Civil War. It did kind of take me to the great cathedrals of Europe, and there's all these little gargoyles, or little, I don't know if they're called gargoyles, little images around churches that some people say were modelled on the craftsmen that made them, or the local villagers that sponsored them, and although that's not as ubiquitous as the sort of thing that we're talking about. It's not like it maybe didn't exist. And that's maybe why we're so, maybe evolutionary speaking, we're really attuned to these sorts of visuals. But I also had a sense in which has there always been that dynamic with history, that there's been a sense that it's beneficial for powerful people to pin down a version of the history. This is what happened when, and then why history works as a discipline is that people need to go back and go, actually, you were wrong. You missed the entirety of indigenous peoples' history. It didn't
Exactly.
all start with the
Right.
British Empire or
Yeah.
various variations of that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we never know what these conversations are going to bring. It's this meandering river, and there's
No,
all
I'm
sorts of
really,
fertile
yeah,
areas.
and I'm absolutely fascinated by you taking it to the information principles, and I'm going to have to go back and look up Claude Shannon sort of information theory because I have forgotten it. Yeah, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to go there. Yeah, yeah. And so from your perspectives, where does this leave us? It feels like as though your podcast series is national security, non-standard lives, and how to match these sorts of things. And we've talked a bit about gender and disarmament. We've talked a bit about our own trajectories, and now we've talked about how we as a species are kind of absorbing information. Do you take all of this and feel comfortable about the future for security, national or international, or ways that we should be thinking or going, or recommendations for young women or young people?
Henrietta,
Big question.
I just
Big question.
I knew you were going to interview us. I knew this. I think you have to answer the question first.
I have to answer.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a really worrying time for me, I have to say, in terms of security. I think there's a lot of difficulties, and I mean, there's obviously terrible, violent things happening in many places around the world at the moment, and there's not clear ways out of them. And I think the ways that were devised in the Cold War, it's not clear how they're going to adapt to the current scenario. So the UN, what a wonderful idea that was, that's proved to be quite complicated to implement in different ways. And also I think it's been fantastic at proving pretty adaptable within its very restricted senses. And the open source stuff that we were talking about, in a way, in my community, there's a lot of optimism about, oh wow, now ordinary people can detect cheating. I don't really have that confidence about it. I think there are some fantastic practitioners who are finding truth, telling the right people the truth, but whether they can get through all the untruths and all the systemic problems with listening things, I don't know the answer to that. Yes, I hope that they can. Yeah. So does that trigger any thoughts from you?
Well, some from me. I think the chances of something catastrophic happening, perhaps nuclear, perhaps in some other way, AI related, or everyone's favorite EMP, of happening like in this decade now, are higher than they were in the previous decade. I can't attach a number to that. I think there's a tendency for a lot of people, both older people and younger people, to go through the world as if it's a game. The old people do it too, actually, as if it's just, not, the right words are not coming to me, but there's a tendency for people to go through life as if it's a diversion or a game. The idea that we are all in somebody else's matrix, or somebody else's video
So that you're saying,
simulation.
so things don't matter in some
Yeah,
kind.
things that matter. And I think that in a way, it's like we're living in a nightmare. It's like, of like, what are nightmares or dreams like? Well, we all talk, it's like the stuff that happens in a dream world. It doesn't make sense. It comes out of left field. I don't know where that came from. This character showed up and then he disappeared. That's what our dreams are like. And I feel like that's our reality right now, is that
people don't feel they have any agency. They don't
people,
feel
well, they only have agency over their small slice of the pie. I get that feeling a lot too. I'm okay. I can't make anything else better, so I'm just going to concentrate on executing my plan for my life as best I can, and as kindly as I can, I hope. But so I think it's like we're living in this. So we went from 100 years ago, and I'm inventing this as I speak. We went 100 years ago from like all of us thinking we were playing in a very carefully regulated board game, where you had to roll the dice, so there was an element of chance, but then you took certain steps.
Like a meritocracy kind of
thing. If
thing.
you got a certain number, just like a planned thing, a planned community, a board game.
Right.
So if you follow the rules, you pick up the $100, you get past this, you don't go to jail, and woohoo, then you are a property owner, or yeah.
And now I think for more and more people, it's like a strange dream world, like not a real world, but a strange dream world. And I think about that a lot for, our politics in America, where it's just this kind of crazy, unrelated to reality dream world.
Like
And
entertainment.
it's like entertainment. And I just feel when I say that there's a higher chance that something catastrophic will happen this decade than there was last decade, I I I don't want something catastrophic to wake people up. And I'm not even sure people need waking. Who's to say which is the better reality? Who's to say which is the better way of processing this existence? Was the board game the better metaphor, or is the dream world the better metaphor? I don't know. But anyway, that's how I answer that question. I'll stop
Wow.
there before I get myself into any more trouble.
All right. I think it's so interesting. It's such a great question. It's so interesting also just to see how different people's minds work in answering this question. I think both of you answered as typical as of your minds, and I'll answer typical. You'll see in my answer that it's typical of my mind, which is that I tend to take a bird's eye view of time. So I sort of, if someone asks a question about time, I fly up above sort of my mental map of reality and sort of look at it over like a couple thousand-year period and like, where are we now? And what does this mean now? And I see this game. So the transition from the game thing to the dream thing, which are they're both similar in that they're sort of they're not like being really present and connected with what's actually happening, which is this wild interdependent, as far as I can tell, this wild interdependent informational reality, like real reality, that is alive. That there's this aliveness to it and this consciousness to it. And it feels to me like this time is the transition. This is what happens when you take the puzzle and you toss it into the air and all the pieces come down and you don't know where it's going to land. And then there's a shit ton of work to do putting it all back together because you just tossed it up into the air. And that's where we are. And part of this puzzle is the way we look at information, and part of the puzzle is the way we look at ourselves in relationship with the earth, and part of the puzzle is the way we look at consciousness and our lack of understanding of this sort of almost personal universe, not almost, the kind of a personal universe where what goes on in your mind actually matters in a way that, I mean, like, it has a causal impact into what you experience. And so I care a lot about what we say is coming in the future because I actually believe that that has some kind of a causal impact, not just because we're saying it out loud and recording it and, a couple hundred people will watch it, maybe, if we're lucky. But, or maybe not, I don't know what the right answer is there. But because the actual thinking of the thoughts can drive changes at some basic infrastructural, informational
Oh, yeah.
level.
Yeah.
And so it's like such an important question to answer. And I think we are just shifting from one worldview to another, and it's going to take 100 years. And this is what happens when you're shifting from one worldview to another, is it's chaos and weirdness.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I totally relate to that idea that we construct the reality we live in. So we need to be mindful and think about that. But it's co-constructed, right? It has to happen with everybody. It can't just be in my head. It has to be a society-wide change. So maybe we need to talk to each other in another 100 years from what you're saying. That's the
Well, at least check in with our future selves and figure out how we did it, because we definitely survived. I don't necessarily mean ourselves personally, but like the human race definitely survived. How did we do it?
Yeah, how did we do it?
Yeah, and it's definitely a good question to think, isn't it? What would we like to be like in 100 years? What would we like society to look like? And I think too, the sort of questions you were inviting, Julia, this sort of, how do we know what we know? I completely see this rather dystopian description you gave us. It's kind of like we're living in a dream or a nightmare. You know, nobody really knows, nobody really gets it. We don't know the rules anymore, so everybody just kind of lives in their own thing, kind of running on empty on whatever they're doing. But wouldn't it be great to remember the kind of basics of, like, you know, commit to that we can believe in truth. It might be hard to get to truth, but there is such a thing as truth, and there is such a thing as kindness and decency and respect, and that's what I'd like in 100 years. Yeah.
Yep.
Me too. All right. Amen. Well, that's been amazing, Henrietta. Thank you. I don't think we have time for dancing, but I feel like our conversation was basically like a dance anyway.
It was, you know, I did, I don't know if I can indulge you in this, and I'm trying to figure out what the best way to do it, but Julia and I were talking about having ringtones for each other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so I've been thinking about yours, Julia, and I think Henrietta, you might enjoy this. By the way, Henrietta, I believe I will be in England in May, and then again in November.
Fabulous.
I
So
will let
if
you
you fancy a
know.
trip to Bristol, please
So I'm
do.
going to share a
Yeah.
screen because I think this will make it easier for you to hear it. So I'm gonna, I think this is the song I selected for you, Julia. So we'll have to take this out of the YouTube thing or we'll get a copyright strike. But
Okay. I want to hear it.
let's see, because it just has so much to do with our conversation.
Well, we can show that you're picking the song, but we can't play it.
That's right. Where is that? Where is the guy who's lost her? Hold on a second.
While you're looking, I'll just tell you, Henrietta, my song for Carmen is the TARDIS door opening on Doctor Who.
Oh, okay. Ominous.
Because she's this
Yeah.
amazingly skilled time traveler who behaves as if she's right
Yes.
here all the time.
And
Okay, this
layers
is
of
so.
depth and complexity. Brilliant.
Exactly.
Yes.
Wow,
Yes.
is this really a song that's not? Oh, here. Okay, so I'll have to play it as a video.
And are you coming
So
to the UK anytime, Julia? That's what yeah.
I don't have plans this year, but that sometimes
Yeah.
that changes. So I will let you know. It'd be awesome to hang out.
you
Please.
let me know
Yes.
if you can hear this.